a huge fan of talking about roots and corn planting. I think they're the most important piece of making sure that we have a good yields out in our farm. So what we did here is we dug a root pit, a root dig, we call it. Anybody do this on their farm? I think it's a great idea to do on your farm at least once in a while, right? And how much did I destroy here to do this? About $20 worth of corn is all I destroyed, okay? So it takes a little effort, but you learn a lot about what happened in your field, what's going on in your field, what's going on under the soil, because what's going on under the soil surface is really, really important. I'm gonna jump down in here. So I'm a corn guy, I've been a corn guy for a long time, but I did take a soils class back in the day, and I learned how to figure out when you see compaction layers. And so you do a pit like this, take your knife, and just start poking it into the soil. See how hard that is? If you're down here, you can actually hear it clicking, right? As I go down, look at what happens. See how easy that knife goes in? So last spring when we planted this, we thought we were in pretty good shape, but we weren't perfect. Most guys in Iowa were not perfect. And we created a compaction layer about 8 to 10 inches deep in this field, okay? As you look at the profile, you can see on this side, all the soil, we're about 2.5, almost 3 feet deep here. All the soil is nice and black on that side. But over here, starting right behind me, you can see there's a little curve of some tanner soils in there. So you got a little clay content coming on here. So everything on top looks nice and black, and you think, well, it's all uniform. Why is there any difference in that field? Because of what's underneath and what's going on. Now, of course, you can't dig trenches across your whole field and see what the soil profile looks like, right? But you can do it here and there and just get a feel for what's going on. The other thing that we can see here is root depth and how deep roots can go. If you look down in the bottom, see we got roots way down here at almost 3 feet deep. And actually if I dug the hole deeper, they'd even be further down. This one over here even went farther. But we stopped everything a little bit because of that compaction problem, where those roots couldn't penetrate down through the compaction layer to get to the other soil. So what we really want to see is a nice prolific root system underground, right? If we could take the soil from here to there and 4 feet down and wash everything off and collect all the root mass, dry it out, we want the same amount of dry matter below the soil as what this is above the soil, okay, the entire plant. So they should really match, right? We generally struggle doing that, but if all conditions are right, you will have as much mass of roots as you do mass of a corn plant above the ground. So as I look at this root, and I'll just jump up there and talk to you guys about this. So when we look at the compaction that we have here, you can see how the root turned just a little bit. See how the crown's just got a little bit of a crook to it. It's not nice and straight. That should be nice and straight down the bottom. So it was trying to push up through the heavier soil or thicker soil and didn't do quite so well. So then we see the more horizontal roots here where they should be going more this way. We do see nice fibrous roots out here because we want to see fine root hairs out there, because those are really the effective part of taking up the moisture and nutrients, is the fine root hairs. The other thing that we look for, and we'll talk about that in a second, is planting depth. So our planting depth here, we're shooting for a little over 2.5 inches, right at 2.5 inches, and we achieved that. The kernel was right there, it fell off. It was there when I dug it up, but that little crook right there is where the kernel was. If I lay my knife there, you kids believe this? That's 2.5 inches between my fingertip and my thumb. Okay, so I lay that down there where the kernel was, and the soil line was right here. So I have all of those roots under the soil, okay? So this is where my 5 sets of nodal roots are, where all the engine that operates everything in that plant, where all the nutrients are taken up, all the moisture is taken up. And I have that working 100% when it's all underneath the soil. If I start dropping or changing the planting depth and get shallower, how many guys planted 1.5 inches or 1.75 inches? Anybody? Everybody still planting that 2.5 like I told them to? Two. But just say 2. 2 is here. 1.5 inches is there, right? So we're exposing the top couple sets of that nodal root system. So if we're planting at 2, we're getting about 4 of them in the ground. So 1/5 of our nutrient and moisture uptaking system is not functioning at 100%, okay? And I'll show you how that's important over here in a second. We want to have it at 2.5 inches. We can get the corn to come up, that's not a problem. When we do testing on hybrids, we actually try and plant them as deep as we can, 3.5, 4 inches. And if they don't emerge, they don't get passed on, they don't come to you. So we're very, very adamant about how we research that stuff and look at that. So now we know what we did with the root and how we did that. So I come and I look at these ear samples. The one on this side on my left was 1.5 inches. The middle one was 2.5, and the right one was at 3. Of those, which one would you throw out? The one on my left, right? Throw this one out, right? These two definitely look better, okay? Subtle, right? There's a little bit of length here. You can tell there's a little bit of girth here, but it's pretty subtle. Same rows of grain pretty much on everything. But when I break the ears apart, 1.5 inches on the top, 2.5 in the middle, 3 on the bottom. What do you see? Which one do you throw out there? Very obvious, right? Our kernel depth is severely restricted because we didn't have that root system working at 100%. Now that's on a more of a fixed eared hybrid. I'd go to a flex ear hybrid. It's even more pronounced. Pretty obvious which one we throw out there, right? We're going to take this one and throw him away. Really good. But the interesting thing is when I throw that flex ear hybrid in there and I compare 2.5 to 3, and I'll grab the cross section of the ear, stack them together like I did with the other ones. So not only we have bigger ears on the 2.5 to 3 inch, but we have a lot of kernel depth too. We're going to throw this one out for kernel depth, right? So we make yield by rows of grain around and kernel depth. Length is important, but we can't add that much yield by adding 1 inch to the ear. We add it by adding diameter and by kernel depth. So if we can get a good kernel depth, this means a healthy plant. It's going to dry better. It's going to just be all around better hybrid. The other thing we did here is a planting date study. So our intention was to plant as early as we could to find the bad day of planting. How many of you guys have every year a day you should not have planted corn, right? Right? There's one day. It didn't emerge well, something just bad with it, it doesn't work well. So we were trying to replicate that and find the day for 2022. But like most people, we got delayed in our planting. We didn't get started until May 11th. And Phil said, well, let's not do that. And I said, no, let's do it anyway, because we're going to tell a different story, okay? So here's May 11th. Same hybrid, 5487. Here's May 23rd, okay? How many of you guys plant corn on May 23rd? If this was your intended hybrid, would stay with the intended hybrid on May 23rd? You would? All right, good, good. There's lots of guys that come May 11th and 15th, they're saying, I need a different hybrid, right? Why would you change? This one's just as good as that, right? Now, we had a June 1st planting that got messed up, which would have been the more interesting one, but this is June 13th. If I get in a delayed situation, I'm not changing hybrids at all, okay? So now let's do the cross section and talk about what we're seeing there. So the early one on top, the middle date in the middle, and the later date on the bottom, okay? We're gonna focus on this side because the tip is the easiest way for us to tell where the black layer is, right? See the black layers on them? Pretty easy, right? The white line right there, white line right there. Okay, these two, 12 days of planting, there's only about a day or two difference in maturity today. Okay. This one here, a month different than planting. I've only got 4 to 5 days difference in maturity. If I take my pencil and I look for the milk line. Now these have been laying out here, so they're a little dry, so this isn't always quite as easy as when they're fresh to open up. But take the tip side of the ear when you crack it open. Put your pen at the top of the kernel, slide it down the tip, and when it pushes in, that's where your milk line is. And if you do it, you can see that there's a little bit of moisture squirts out. So when I do it on this hybrid, it's essentially the same place. I come down here, and I got just a touch difference. That's about 2 days difference. So I'm about 5 days behind the earliest planting and planted a month later.
What's the maturity of this?
This is a 105-day hybrid. Okay, so The key is when you get into a delayed planting thing in the springtime, don't change your maturities until at least the 25th of May, and I really say June 1st. Then go ahead and start changing if you really want to, because you know, we don't always get the kind of summers we get this year and stuff like that. But the good thing about that is the news is that if you didn't plant most of your corn in April, most of it got planted in May or mid-May, our chances of having good quality corn that's dry and not going to take a lot of dryer gas is pretty good right now. So I'm really happy to see that advancement. So also, when we look at these plots, and if we were to go through the showcase, how many of you went through the showcase already up in front? If you were to go through the showcase, if you were to break open the ears from 6227 all the way down to 5245, you would find virtually no difference in maturity line on that group of hybrids. Mother Nature has just kind of squeezed everything together and pushes it along, okay? The whole goal of that plant is to make kernels and make them successful, so it's going to push it along and help it get better.
Is that normal every year?
Yep, so virtually every year you can see those things kind of move together. If we get that year that is just bing, 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 everything is just right, you'll see that maturity spread show up, okay? The other thing is that if you're planting multiple hybrids of maturity, which one do you plant first? The late one? Okay, so you plant the late one first, then you plant the early one last, now you just squeezed them together. If you're trying to create the separation, plant the early one first and plant the late one last. That's how you create that separation for harvest moisture separation, so you can spread out your harvest time and those kind of things. That's a real key to change up that thought process. So the key at planting time is to have uniform moisture in the seed bed, right? And you want to surround the seed with moist soil, not just touch the moist soil. You want to surround the seed with moist soil. And so that's why 2.5 usually gets us there better, because if you plant an inch, anything less than 2, that trench that you make, you have some evaporation that comes out that trench, and you can dry out the seed, the soil right above the seed. So he's no longer surrounded in moist soil. He's going to do better when surrounded by moist soil. You'll find more uniform emergence. It might come up a day or two later than 2-inch planted corn, but your uniformity emergence is going to be much greater. So, because they're all getting the same amount of moisture at the same time.